Namaste. Welcome to today's She and Rights session, featuring the virtual press conference of Women's Rights Caucus around the 70th session of the UN Commission on Status of Women, or CSW70 as we call it. This special She and Rights session is together co-hosted by the co-conveners, Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, the African Women's Development and Communication Network, Fòs Feminista, Outright National, and Young Feminist Caucus, and partners including Global Center for Health Diplomacy and Inclusion and CNS. The session will provide updates on the CSW70 session and its outcomes. Some quick housekeeping announcements before we begin. For today's session, interpretation is available in Spanish, French, and English, courtesy Fòs Feminista and Women's Rights Caucus. You can choose your preferred language by clicking on the interpretation button or the globe sign on your computer screens. Also, and I thank the interpretation support and the interpreters for being there with us. Participants can please type in their questions in the chat box, even as the speakers present. We will take up as many relevant questions as time permits after all speakers have presented. And speakers are requested to please keep to their allotted time limit. Friends, as we know, the Commission on the Status of Women is a global intergovernmental body that provides a platform to assess and address progress on gender equality. The 70th session of this UN's largest annual forum on gender equality opened yesterday in New York at the UN headquarters. Every year, the CSW focuses on a specific priority theme to provide recommendations and develop actionable outcomes. This year's priority theme is ensuring and strengthening access to justice for all women and girls, and rightly so, as legal inequality is among all kinds of inequalities and injustices faced by women. Women globally hold only 64% of the legal rights enjoyed by men. The Commission adopted its agreed conclusions on women's access to justice, ensuring and strengthening access to justice for all women and girls, including by promoting inclusive and equitable legal systems, eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and addressing structural barriers. The United States of America was the only country that voted against it after proposing amendments that opposed language on gender identity, reproductive health, and AI regulations. This rare break from consensus highlights widening global political divides over gender rights, and we have to be careful about them and fight them outright. Let us hear more from our esteemed speakers. I now invite our first speaker, Maitree Muzumdar, a feminist organizer and policy advocate working on gender justice and human rights, centering marginalized communities and grassroots movements across India, Asia Pacific, and the Global South. She is also co-founder of the Feminist Manch and co-convener of the Young Feminist Caucus and the Women's Rights Caucus. Welcome, Maitree.
Thank you, Shobha, and thank you for also setting the context. Hi, everyone. My name is Maitree, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Young Feminist Caucus. This year's negotiations took place amid a global rollback of rights, shrinking civic space, rising authoritarianism and militarism, and deepening economic crisis. These dynamics shape multilateral system, including CSW. The decision to break consensus and proceed to a vote underscores how deeply contested commitments to gender equality, human rights, and access to justice remain in this current geopolitical moment. They reflect broader global power structures. While regressive amendments on sexual and reproductive health and rights, fundamental freedoms, intersectionality, and reparations were rejected because of cross-regional mobilization by feminist civil society and supportive states, negotiations revealed resistance by powerful states and mobilized anti-gender, anti-rights actors. Young feminist movements have long insisted that gender inequality is rooted in economic exploitation, militarism, and historical injustice, as recognized in the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and ICPD Program of Action. Member states approached access to justice as a technical issue rather than a political issue, focusing on procedural reforms without addressing the structural conditions that produce injustice. This allows governments to avoid confronting the political interests and power relations that sustain injustice, including systems of criminalization, unequal economic relations, and political repression that disproportionately affects marginalized communities and countries across the global south. In many contexts, states themselves are responsible for serious human rights violations through misuse of security laws, policing, and impunity of armed forces used to justify repression and criminalization against communities demanding justice. When negotiations assume that states are acting in good faith despite these realities, they risk reinforcing the barriers to access to justice and prioritizing state power over human rights and democratic participation. Sexual and gender based violence must also be understood within these broader systems of power and control, and responses must extend beyond service delivery to guaranteeing bodily autonomy and accountability. In many contexts, authoritarian governance creates conditions in which violence is used to maintain political and social order by silencing dissent, targeting women human rights defenders, and enabling technology facilitated violence that restricts civic space. These patterns of repression also appear in laws that criminalize LGBTI communities, regulate women and gender diverse people's bodies, such as through restrictions on abortion, and render people illegal. The refusal to name discriminatory laws, dilution of commitments under sovereignty clause, and phrases like as applicable allow existing socio-political and economic hierarchies to remain untouched. Resourcing discussions remained disconnected from macroeconomic policies, which determine whether our justice systems can function at all. These policies are often shaped through global economic governance structures and international financial institutions, which impose fiscal constraints on countries across the global south. Debt burdens and austerity frequently limit public spending, resulting in underfunded courts, limited legal aid services, and reduced access to essential services and remedies. Without addressing these structural economic constraints, commitments to strengthen access to justice remain difficult to realize in practice. There has also been reluctance to address the impunity of the private sector in the privatization of essential public services, climate injustice, human rights violations, and development projects that deepen inequalities between countries and people. These harms are closely tied to development models that prioritize economic growth and profit over people's rights, yet these models remained unquestioned, making strong corporate accountability and reparative remedies essential. These realities demand stronger accountability for human rights violations committed by both state and non-state actors. Justice cannot exist without democratizing power and resources or confronting the systems that produce injustice. Governments, corporations, UN entities, and international institutions are duty bearers. Feminist movements are rights holders. As rights holders and collective political actors organizing across borders to challenge these systems of injustice, young feminist movements must have meaningful decision-making power and protection from reprisals online and offline. These are obligations and not optional commitments. Thank you. And back to you, Shobha.
Thank you, Maitree, for guiding us through what you all have said. Our next speaker is Josefina Sabate. Josefina is an Argentinian feminist researcher, educator, and activist working at the intersection of gender justice, SRHR, and human rights. She is currently part of the Political Advocacy Unit at FUSA Asociacion Civil. Welcome, Josefina. The floor is yours.
Hola, muchas gracias, Yoba. Quería
Thank,
chequear que se
thank,
escuchara correctamente.
yes, thank
Bien,
you.
bien, muchas gracias. Bueno, quisiera poder continuar con lo que comentó mi compañera anterior de manera muy clara en relación al proceso político que sucedió durante las últimas semanas para la para la aprobación del documento al que llegamos, que fue un proceso marcado por un contexto político internacional muy adverso en relación a las cuestiones de la igualdad y los derechos de las mujeres. Y es muy destacable la participación de la sociedad civil y de este caucus, que hizo un trabajo enorme para poder lograr abordar un documento que, si bien, como dijo la compañera anterior, no es lo más progresivo que hubiéramos querido. Es destacable que sí tenemos un documento en donde se sostienen el lenguaje acordado en algunas temáticas y nos resulta importante destacar también la firmeza de la facilitadora de Costa Rica, que logró, pese a las adversidades y pese a los obstáculos que propuso y las enmiendas, sobre todo Estados Unidos, que además propuso por primera vez en la historia de la CSW que el documento acordado se vote, lo cual siente un precedente quizás no muy bueno para el futuro. No obstante, el trabajo fuerte de la facilitadora logró este documento y nos parece muy importante destacar el trabajo de la sociedad civil en relación a los documentos y comunicados que se fueron elaborando para poder abordar y llegar a este documento acordado, porque hubiera sido mucho peor no tener ningún documento y sentar también ese precedente. En este sentido, también, bueno, destacamos que en relación, quisiera dar un poco un contexto en relación a América Latina y el Caribe también, que venimos sufriendo en los últimos años un retroceso enorme en las políticas de género e igualdad. Actualmente esta semana está asumiendo en el gobierno de Chile un gobierno de ultraderecha que habla en contra del aborto, incluso en casos de violación. También en Argentina estamos viviendo un gran retroceso en términos de materia de igualdad de género, de salud sexual y reproductiva. En Argentina, si bien tenemos las leyes aprobadas, hay un montón de obstáculos en el acceso. Y es por eso que desde América Latina venimos abordando la agenda de los cuidados, que está presente, por suerte, dentro del documento, en relación a entender los cuidados como un nuevo paradigma de desarrollo, poniendo la sostenibilidad de la vida en el centro, la justicia social y la igualdad de género, que está plasmada en el compromiso de Buenos Aires y también en el compromiso de Tlatelolco, que se firmó el año pasado en México en la Conferencia Regional de la Mujer. También en América Latina impulsa fuertemente la agenda de la salud sexual y reproductiva, con obstáculos, con muchos obstáculos, pero la sociedad civil seguimos impulsando y luchando por esta agenda para que se cumplan los derechos y se garanticen los derechos sexuales y reproductivos de todas las mujeres, niñas, en toda su diversidad, especialmente defendiendo el compromiso de Montevideo del 2013, que es el documento hasta ahora más progresista en América Latina y el Caribe en materia de salud sexual y reproductiva. En relación al acceso a la justicia para mujeres y niñas, que es el tema de esta CSW, creemos que es muy importante poder cuestionar y transformar las lógicas de la justicia patriarcal, que históricamente ha limitado el reconocimiento y la protección de los derechos. Entonces, garantizar la justicia significa también asegurar la protección efectiva de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, eliminando barreras legales, institucionales. Como decía la compañera anterior, no es solo una cuestión técnica el acceso a la justicia, sino que es una cuestión más amplia a abordar y hay muchos obstáculos que enfrentan las mujeres y las niñas para acceder a la justicia, financieros, geográficos, institucionales, culturales, que obstaculizan el acceso a la justicia, el acceso a la autonomía corporal y a los servicios de salud sexual y de reparación frente a vulneraciones de estos derechos. Pero bueno, esta agenda en América Latina, para contextuarlo en nuestra región, enfrenta muchas resistencias, como dije. La verdad es que la mayoría de los países, o muchos de los países de América Latina y el Caribe, están en contra de esta agenda, y estamos viendo un retroceso. No obstante, hay algunos países que siguen defendiendo y que seguimos la sociedad civil defendiendo estos derechos, países como Brasil, Uruguay, México, que ayer habló muy bien también en la sesión de debate, y Colombia también. Son países que por suerte continúan defendiendo y continuamos defendiendo en la región estos derechos. Y para no extenderme mucho, bueno, quería comentar un ejemplo importante de la lucha de la sociedad civil, una noticia que sucedió esta última semana en relación al tema del acceso a la justicia en la CSW, que la Corte Interamericana condenó al Estado peruano por las más de 300.000 esterilizaciones forzadas realizadas durante el fujimorismo, en su mayoría mujeres rurales e indígenas. Y lo más importante es que la primera vez que la Corte Interamericana habla de esterilizaciones forzadas y reconoce que lo que sucedió en Perú con miles de mujeres es el resultado de una política de Estado. Bueno, creo que ya estoy en tiempo. Yoga.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you. Muchas gracias too. Our next speaker is Ayshka Najib. She is a climate and gender justice advocate and serves as a co-convener to the Young Feminist Caucus, as well as youth lead to the Action Coalition on Feminist Climate Justice with UN Women and the Generation Equality Forum. Ayshka works to bridge the gap between local struggles and global decision-making, ensuring that perspectives from the Global South shape climate and gender agendas. Welcome, Ayshka.
Thank you so much, Shobha. Hi, everyone. My name is Ayshka, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Young Feminist Caucus. I sit here today holding on to our collective dream for a liberated future. However, I also sit here deeply frightened by the war crimes that are being committed against the people of my region in Swana. This is not a political agenda I'm sharing, but a matter of basic human dignity to speak up about the atrocities here in the region, from Palestine, Iran, Lebanon, the Gulf states to Sudan, and more. The fundamental truth that we cannot have gender justice under war, occupation, and genocide. This is not a political agenda, but a call to action to recognize that CSW doesn't exist in isolation. As negotiators in that room debate over and over again on our rights, our autonomy, our leadership, our freedom, the world is being torn to pieces. When will CSW catch up to the realities of the world? When will multilateralism catch up to the needs on the ground? When will the world finally stop to hear the cries of our people? As the YFC, we have been working with the larger youth constituencies to put our voices on the table. We have co-led the development of the Global Youth and Adolescent Recommendations, which came from the consultation of over 23,000 young people. It is grounded in the fact that justice for all women and girls is not a service, but a political, economic, and structural struggle. It is systematically obstructed by patriarchal, militarized, and fascist systems manifested through war economies, arms trade, corporate capture, and fossil fuel-based extractive models that dispossess indigenous communities. Therefore, achieving justice requires the dismantling of these systems, redistribution of power, demilitarization, protection and expansion of civic spaces, and the meaningful leadership of young people and feminist movements at all levels. Last night, as I watched the adoption of the CSW70 agreed conclusions, few things were clear to me. Firstly, that as feminists and as youth, we will hold the line. No matter how much powerful states and anti-rights actors try to push their regressive agendas, we will organize and lobby, and people power will win. Secondly, I saw the deep fractures that exist in multilateralism, where we have to continue to fight to defend our rights and celebrate when we're given the bare minimums, the best of the worst. This is not the multilateralism for the people, as the UN Charter states. Lastly, I was also left appalled and saddened by the double standards in the room, as one progressive country after the other from the West took the mic to call for ensuring access to justice and gender equality for all women and girls. These were the same very states aiding and abetting billions of dollars in military violence and occupation in global South countries, especially in Swana, displacing and murdering millions of women and girls. And that is a political choice. So this is a call to action, to hold them accountable and dismantle their imperialist systems. نحن ندعو للمقاومة, we call resistance. نحن ندعو للتحرير, we call liberation. نحن ندعو للعدالة, we call for equity.
Thank you very much, Ayshka, and thank you for pointing out to the ravages of wars and conflicts and the bad effect, in fact, the detrimental effect it is having on gender equality, and we have to fight it all together. And that can happen, I think, only through a feminist development model. Our next speaker is Doris Tulifau, a Samoan feminist, survivor and founder of Brown Girl Vogue, a youth-led movement mobilizing across Samoa and the Pacific diaspora. Her work centers on human rights, SRHR, climate justice, and decolonial education. Through after-school programs to empower girls, young women, and all PIDSOGIESC communities. Over to you, Doris.
Thank you, Shobha. From a Pacific perspective, justice is not experienced through a single system. Women navigate a continuum of justice systems, formal courts, customary governance, faith-based authority, and family negotiation, and women move between these spaces in highly strategic ways. One of the clearest realities is that for most women, particularly in rural, remote, and outer island communities, customary and community-based justice mechanisms remain the primary entry point for justice. They are geographically closer, faster, costly than formal courts. But women are also clear-eyed about the limitations. In cases of family violence and sexual violence, customary processes often prioritize reconciliation, compensation, or restoring harmony between families over women's safety and accountability for harm. Family reputation, church authority, and society hierarchy frequently pressure survivors to remain silent about violence. Too often, cultural silence continues to protect perpetrators. Young and elderly women face particular obstacles to reporting abuse, accessing services, or receiving the support they need. Justice systems must actively center and protect their voices. In navigating systems of justice in the Pacific, women also need to confront the broader structural inequalities and challenges. Climate change, rising seas, displacement, extreme weather is intensifying poverty, insecurity, and violence against women and girls across small island states. Climate change is not only an environmental issue, it is a justice crisis, and Pacific women are on the front lines. Economic inequality is equally critical. Without economic security, women cannot leave violent situations or pursue legal action. Across the Pacific, decades of neoliberal economic policies have weakened the very systems that women rely on for protection and justice. Technology is also creating new forms of violence, threats against women and girls. Digital harassment, exploitation, and surveillance are increasingly affecting women and girls across the region. Technology facilitated violence must be recognized and addressed as a serious justice issue. Across the region, despite these challenges, grassroots women and their organizations continue to lead the way. Across Asia and the Pacific, women are often the first responders to violence and the strongest advocates of justice, yet they remain chronically underfunded and excluded from decision-making spaces. Women with disabilities, LGBT plus communities, migrants, rural women continue to face multiple intersecting barriers to justice. Their leadership and lived realities must be meaningful, included in policies and solution. At the global level, Pacific voices also remain structurally excluded. Small island states and grassroots organizations face visa barriers, funding limitations, and structural exclusion from global spaces like CSW. Representation matters to achieve real justice. At a time of growing global backlash against gender equality, feminist movements across the Pacific will continue to organize, speak out, and demand accountability. Justice for women and girls cannot wait. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Doris, for sharing the Pacific voices on inequality and also the need for gender justice. I now invite Michelle Anzaya, an African feminist and communications professional driven by the power of strategic advocacy. With a focus on amplifying marginalized voices, she blends creative storytelling with a commitment to gender justice and systemic change across the continent. Welcome, Michelle. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shopa. My name is Michelle Anzaya, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the African feminists. So civil society participation has always been central to the strength and legitimacy of the Commission on the Status of Women. Feminist movements, grassroots organizations, and women's rights defenders have historically played a vital role in shaping global norms, holding governments accountable, and also ensuring that international commitments reflect the lived realities of women and girls. Well, yet as we gather here for CSW70, we must confront a very troubling reality. The space for civil society participation, particularly for feminist activists from the global south, is shrinking. Many African women and girls are facing increasingly restrictive access to participation. For example, the visa bans, the visa bonds, the visa denials that are based on age and location, which make it difficult and in some cases actually impossible for them to participate in UN processes like CSW. For those who are able to travel, concerns around racial profiling, surveillance, and safety further undermine the ability of advocates to engage freely and safely in global policy spaces. At the same time, we're witnessing the growing presence and influence of anti-rights actors within multilateral spaces, often facing far fewer restrictions than feminist civil society organizations. This imbalance risks distorting participation and weakening the accountability that global gender equality processes depend on. When African feminist leaders, grassroots organizers, and community advocates cannot access spaces like CSW, the global agenda risks being shaped without the voices of those who are most directly affected by inequality and injustice. In response to these challenges, African feminist movements are not remaining silent. Across the continent, we are building new spaces for engagement and solidarity. Initiatives like Africa Disrupt CSW demonstrate the power of African feminists to reimagine participation and ensure that African realities, knowledge, and lived experiences inform global gender equality debates. We're also seeing the emergence of national and regional CSW hubs across Africa, including initiatives in Uganda, the Gambia, and Cameroon. These hubs recognize both the importance of the CSW as a global platform and the persistent barriers that prevent many grassroots activists from accessing it. By creating local spaces for engagement, these alternatives are democratizing participation and strengthening feminist movement building across the continent. At the same time, we must remain vigilant about broader challenges to women's rights. African feminists have raised concerns about proposals such as the draft African Charter on Family Values and Sovereignty, which risks undermining existing regional human rights protections like the Maputo Protocol and rolling back hard-won gains for women, girls, and marginalized communities. As the Women's Rights Caucus, we want to be clear. Civil society participation is not optional. It is essential. The legitimacy and effectiveness of the Commission on the Status of Women depends on the meaningful inclusion of feminist voices from all regions. We call on member states, UN leadership, and the CSW Bureau to uphold meaningful, holistic, and inclusive participation as a core principle of CSW processes, and to address the structural and systemic barriers that continue to limit the effective participation of women and civil society from the Global South, including the restrictive visa regimes and unequal access to travel. In line with the Africa Disrupt CSW70 call to action, we urge the strengthening of equitable hybrid participation models and accountability mechanisms so that diverse regional perspectives meaningfully shape global gender equality agendas. At the same time, any discussions on reforms to the UN system must reinforce and not weaken the global architecture for gender equality and ensure that CSW outcomes reflect the lived realities and priorities of women and girls across all regions. African feminists and feminist movements worldwide will continue to organize, mobilize, and hold power to account within and beyond the UN spaces. Our message remains clear. Justice for women and girls cannot be realized if those most affected are excluded from the spaces where laws, norms, and global commitments are shaped. Thank you, and back to you, Shoba.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And we all appreciate and join your powerful call to the UN to protect and work for gender equality. Our next speaker is Asel Dunganaeva from Kyrgyzstan. She is a human rights activist and social development specialist from Kyrgyzstan with over 20 years of experience in designing, implementing, monitoring, and developing programs in Central Asia. She is the co-founder of the public foundation JIPAR, which works closely with migrant women and their families in the Chui region to promote their social and economic rights. Over to you, Asel.
Hello, everyone. Could you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Hello, everyone. I am Asel from APWLD, and I am speaking on behalf of the Women's Rights Caucus, representing Asia. Women and girls have never been closer to equality and never closer to losing it. Across Asia, women and girls in all their diversity continue to face profound barriers to justice. These barriers are structural, social, economic, geographic, and institutional, felt most by the most marginalized, women in rural, remote, and maritime areas, indigenous women, women with disabilities, sex workers, migrant workers, marriage migrants, refugees, women living with HIV and LGBTIQ+. Our regional civil society consultations ahead of CSW constantly reveal that justice systems often exist in law, but not in lived experience. Women may have rights on paper, but face stigma, fear of retaliation, lack of legal aid, and economic dependency that prevent them from overclaiming those rights. Across Asia, justice systems remain inaccessible, under-resourced, and attacked by patriarchy and inequality. Discriminatory laws and colonial legal legacies continue to control women's bodies, restrict sexuality and identity, and criminalize marginalized communities. Even when legal protections and reforms exist, implementation remains weak. In Central Asia, for example, legal protections against domestic violence have expanded in 5 countries in recent years. Yet, across the region, we are witnessing a disturbing rollback of women's human rights, protections against gender-based violence, and weakening. Women human rights defenders faced increased surveillance, harassment, and legal restrictions. Technology facilitated gender-based violence has also become a powerful tool of control. Cyberstalking, doxing, online harassment weaponize sexuality and identity to silence diverse women and girls. But access to justice cannot be separated from the economic systems in which women live. For millions of women across Asia, the first experience of injustice is not in a courtroom, it's in the economy. Economic policy is often presented in neutral and technical, but economic decisions are essentially political choices. Across the region, debt-driven development, austerity policies, and economic inequality are diverging. Public resources away from healthcare, education, and social protection, making justice even more inaccessible for women and communities already living on the margins. Justice therefore demands structural transformation, redistribution of power and resources, demilitarization of economies, and decolonization of global governments. It requires dismantling systems of power that perpetuate inequality, promoting repair and recompense for victims, community, and relationships, and can be deeply transformative process. Without transforming these structural conditions, access to justice cannot be realized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asel. And now we open for the Q&A session. Participants, please type in your questions in the chat box, and we will take up all relevant questions as much as time permits. We already have a few questions. There is a question from Alma Rondanini that how can the agreed conclusion inform the upcoming UNGA 8 What key takeaways can be useful for young feminists at the grassroots? Any of the speakers can answer this question, please.
I can start from the Young
Yes,
Feminist
yes,
Caucus, and
yes,
then
yes,
I
yes,
can add in and build
yes,
on.
right.
I think CSW70 really gives us leverage for UNGA, but it needs to be used strategically. As young feminists, what we can do is highlight where there are national gaps, where there is opportunity to push for concrete, measurable commitments from member states that are more time-bound. Also ensuring that global agreements are reflecting grassroots priorities and people's agenda. I think one of the key lessons for all of us as activists, as human rights defenders, as movement builders is to really also map how power is flowing between these global frameworks and local contexts, and using our networks to really link this advocacy across scales, and to make sure that our participation as young feminists is not tokenistic, it's not symbolic. And I think grassroots organizers, it's really essential that there is space to center grassroots movements, to demand accountability, and to resist co-optation while building solidarity across movements and constituencies. And maybe I can ask if Ayshka wants to add something.
Yeah. Yes, please.
For sure. Thank you so much, Maitree, for the precedent. I also believe that we need to reflect very well on the CSW70 process that took place, especially what went down yesterday with the US being the only country that voted against having an adopted agreed conclusion, and also the way that the anti-rights movements and regressive states have been organizing so very well this year is an important reflection for us to understand that we have so much more work to do on ground, back with our feminist collectives, back with our own organizations, to come back stronger for the next intergovernmental processes that is there, whether that is HLPF to ICPD to UN80. And I think it is also a testament of time of how within the multilateralism as a whole, the gender architecture has been weakened and has been eroded, and we cannot let it vanish. And this is the time for us to revolt against those practices and make sure that we're coming together to ensure that we're looking at the bigger picture of multilateralism as a whole, not just, few intergovernmental processes such as CSW or General Assembly, but what is multilateralism delivering to women and girls on the ground, to feminists on the ground. And I feel like that is where a lot of the gaps lie, and that's where we need to work on. and the UNAT reform, as well as the CSW revitalization processes, give us that opportunity to do so. And it's very important that we know of this technical work that is happening and how we can meaningfully engage as young feminists in those processes.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to add on anything to this? Any other speaker? Okay, Violet Mugeha wants to know, how can you speed up the decisions taken to the grassroots level in remote areas? Decisions taken at the global level. Open to any of the speakers, please. How can we translate this into local action, basically?
Sí, permiso,
Yes.
tomo la
Yes.
palabra.
Yes.
Ya algo
Yes,
mencionaron
please.
las compañeras anteriores, pero creo que es fundamental en estos procesos internacionales y globales que las organizaciones feministas podamos traer a estos espacios qué es lo que está pasando en las organizaciones y en los territorios. Es fundamental porque todo lo que se trae acá es lo que podemos ver del trabajo territorial, y en estos momentos en donde hay a nivel internacional, como mencionaron, muchos conflictos en el multilateralismo y mucha dificultad de abordar consensos, más que nunca es fundamental generar alianzas estratégicas al interior de los territorios e ir a trabajar con cada comunidad y poder transmitir en un lenguaje acorde la importancia también de este trabajo a nivel internacional y que haya un diálogo entre el trabajo a nivel local con las comunidades de base y este trabajo internacional que tiene que tener un ida y vuelta, un diálogo, para que se pueda traducir en acciones concretas en los territorios este trabajo que se da a nivel internacional. Entonces es muy importante poder tener en cuenta, poder estar muy en el territorio más que nunca para poder observar qué es lo que realmente está pasando y cuáles son realmente las necesidades de nuestras comunidades, que nosotras después tenemos la posibilidad de transmitirlas en estos espacios internacionales.
Thank you, Josefina. We have a question from Rosalind Babanisi, that how has the Women's Rights Caucus of Solomon Islands contributed to promoting gender equality and enhancing women's participation in decision-making processes within your community and in other communities, in other countries, sorry. So this is a question for our speaker from the Pacific Islands.
Hello.
Yes.
I won't speak for Solomon Islands, but for the whole Pacific. I think with the Women's Rights Caucus, it's a good time where we come together to understand what the policies that we should be fighting for. If we didn't have WRC, we wouldn't know global movements that we should be a part of. We know that a lot of us are not here because of, like what I said in my speech, visas, travel bans, crazy Trump. And so me being here, I'm trying to make sure I'm in all these spaces. But that's what's great about Women's Rights Caucus with the Pacific Voices. They make sure that we're understanding, we get the emails, how do we gather together as we're not all here in New York. So I think with the Solomons, Samoa, Fiji, we're all online. Everyone's messaging me like, Doris, you have to go to this meeting. Doris, you have to go over here. Make sure the language is being said. So me being here and only a few of the CSOs in New York, that's how WRC is making sure that we're moving together. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. There is another question from Zafar Kidwai, and that is for Michelle. Thanks for underlining critical importance of civil society participation. Is it possible to guarantee space for civil society, especially, as you said, those are the most likely who are excluded?
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, at the moment, it would be rather very, we are not able to guarantee that there will be access or participation for this, and we must just continuously demand for our rights to access the venue. But you see, when you look at it from a broader perspective, it has to be both, this requires a structural and very deliberate action in where that the UN aligns the importance of civil society participation. Also, it needs addressing the structural barriers, the visa regimes, the visa bans, like they need to really address them in such a way that civil society organizations are guaranteed of their safety while also taking part in these processes. So at the moment, what we can do is continuously and fearlessly demand for the access to these spaces, and for every hybrid mechanism that is there for participation, we make sure we take advantage of it, use it, and try to be actually part of the conversation, even if we are joining from different spaces that are not actually the physical CSW. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, this is a question, I think, wherein perhaps all the speakers can give their perspective. That the question is that justice systems or legal frameworks are different in different countries. For example, a large number of countries do not have laws in place against gender-based violence. Does this become a challenge? And how to have coherent justice and legal policies for gender equality and human rights everywhere? Maitree, would you like to begin? And I think if all the speakers contribute to this question, it would be great.
Sure, I can start.
Yes.
I think one of the key demands that feminist civil society has done, also looking at the outcomes of the CSW agreed conclusions, is that access to justice goes a lot beyond just legal redress. We know that law can be a very helpful tool, but as a lawyer, I also know how law can be used to oppress and criminalize communities in authoritative contexts. So something that we fight for is to look at the structures that make injustice possible in the first place. So looking at justice from a lens of social, political, economic justice, climate justice, and legal redress to support these systems. And I can perhaps pass the floor to my colleague and everyone can build on from here.
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you so much, Maitree. I think it's also important to understand the why normative frameworks are needed, because we're seeing a rise in anti-rights, right-wing governments. We're seeing a rise in oppressions and crackdown on civic spaces and dissent. And this is the reason why having a normative framework that sets the standard of where the legal implications should lie is important, so that we can bring it back to our own countries and work with our own governments to show that, hey, you were in New York, you consented to this document that was adopted, and now it is time for us to implement that in our own national context. And if we do not have normative consensus documents, then it becomes, we do not have anywhere to point fingers to. We do not have any document to say, this is where the standard should be, this is what our laws should look like, this is what the implementation should look like. And that's why I really, really want us all to sit together and sit with some discomfort as well, because yesterday what US did was a complete sabotage. It was the first time ever that an agreed conclusion was put to vote as a whole. This has never happened before, and this is because US was on the membership of the Commission on the Status of Women, and hence they could have called for a vote for the entire agreed conclusion. This had led to certain countries abstaining, and US not agreeing, like disagreeing, and few countries 37 countries voting for the agreed conclusion. And what a voting agreed conclusion does is that it means now it is not a consensus document. Hence, it has been devaluated, and the value of that agreed conclusion has reduced because some countries can say, hey, this was not agreed by consensus, and hence we're not okay with implementing or taking things from that agreed conclusion to our own legislative frameworks. And I think we need to ensure that as we move forward, we need to come together and strategize, understand how these technical aspects work, how voting frameworks work, where regressive countries are coming together and operationalizing. And only as we start to identify these patterns is when we can have a more, proactive advocacy to ensure that what is being agreed in normative spaces actually is matching up to the needs and gaps that we're seeing on the ground.
Thank you. Any of the other speakers would you like to add?
Yes,
Joseph?
can I,
Yes,
can I
please.
also share?
Yes,
I
please.
would like to share from the Central Asia perspective and
Yes.
from my country, Kyrgyzstan.
Yes.
In this last 5-6 years, we noticed shrinking space for civil society organizations, and especially we have much difficulties for crisis centers, for shelters, and for groups who are really marginalized. For example, prisoners, women groups, drug users groups, women with disability, and groups who stay in remote areas, because access to funds is very important. But we provided many advocacies with mobilizing and activating women from grassroots level and national level. For example, we have good law where we have 30% of gender quota, and we have 30 and more percentage on grassroots level among local deputies. And we have like this strategy to strengthen grassroots voices and to promote more women on local level, on parliament. And the second, we should strengthen our sub-regional and regional engagement. You know, it's very difficult to attend on CSW because it's global level. We have restrictions in visa and also financing, but strengthening regional movements and our platforms, like, for example, we provide pre-consultations before CSW in Bangkok, and it was very important for Asia-Pacific region to collect our voices and to share information. And like these platforms, we also have in Central Asia sub-regional level. And we created a national alliance against gender violence, and we promote young women to secretariat because without young girls, young women, our struggle will not be so strong. And I saw the question about men engagement. We created like awards in our context, like champions of gender equality among men. And on local level, we provide like this award, and men, they are very happy, and also religious men also they provide support for women's initiatives. And we are a Muslim country, and on Fridays when they provide meetings with their groups, Muslim groups, men, they say about violence and about women's rights, but it needs time to explain them and to change their mind. And and we provide like these activities in it's my examples. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and great initiative, good example. Josefina, would you like to say something in the context of Argentina? how to have coherent justice and legal policies.
Sí,
Yes, please.
justamente, bueno, quería sumar eso en relación al acceso a la justicia, por lo que venimos luchando. Uno de los grandes obstáculos en el acceso a la justicia es que la justicia en Argentina y en América Latina es intrínsecamente patriarcal. Entonces, lo que venimos luchando en Argentina, hay varias leyes, por ejemplo, de capacitación al personal administrativo, al personal judicial, a todos los funcionarios, leyes que actualmente no se están cumpliendo. Entonces, lo que quería decir es muy importante que los movimientos feministas impulsemos y luchemos por una justicia que no sea patriarcal, que sea con perspectiva de género, a través de capacitaciones y de elección de funcionarios y funcionarias que tengan una perspectiva de género. Por ejemplo, en Argentina ahora se está queriendo implementar una ley de penas muy altas en caso de mujeres, de falsos testimonios de mujeres. Entonces eso amedrenta a las mujeres a denunciar, además de que el acceso a la justicia, solo el 2% de los casos de violencia de género llegan a la justicia porque hay un montón de obstáculos a los que tienen que superar y hay muy pocas condenas. Entonces, además de abogar por las leyes, lo otro que quería sumar es que tenemos que abogar por que esas leyes se cumplan efectivamente y hacer un seguimiento del cumplimiento de esas leyes es muy importante porque en Argentina hay muchas leyes, por ejemplo, en salud sexual y reproductiva y en cuestión de género, pero actualmente no se están cumpliendo. Entonces, como sociedad civil, nuestro deber también es abogar por ese seguimiento luego de la aprobación de las leyes.
Thank you. Doris, would you like to add something?
I think, Michelle, I'll just add,
Yeah.
as you know, in the Pacific, we have the highest rates of gender-based violence. And it's no different from what everyone said. We have really strong laws in Fiji and Vanuatu, and still it's just not, like I said in my speech, it's easier just to do something in the village than going through different, the police station, the hospitals. They're all work in silos, especially for women that live far away and destination and geographically. So I think that's what we're talking about, and especially with CSW, is making sure that these actually land in our countries and they actually make a difference. But we do have laws in the Pacific, but we have the highest rates of gender-based violence. It's just still not working.
Okay, thank you. Another question, perhaps, where perhaps all our speakers can give their voice to. Yes, please. Yes, Michelle.
Allow me to just respond a little bit from my perspective on the question on men engagement.
Yes.
So for what we do, from where I sit, we normally have programs. I feel like it's important to have programs and talk about decolonizing community programs so that we get to teach men about women's rights, about care work, and also access to public services. We also have the how do we call it? The Africa Feminist Macroeconomic Academy, where we have quotas that include men in the cohorts so that they understand feminist macroeconomics. So basically, it's just forums to demystify feminism to communities so that men can understand the progressiveness of gender equality. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you. I'll call out the question, although it's in the chat box, but this session is being streamlined live on YouTube also. So for the benefit of our listeners on YouTube, the question was that how can women and men in the community work together to ensure equal rights, opportunities, and respect for both genders while respecting cultural and religious traditions? So Michelle has given her answer. I would like the other speakers to please respond to this. How can women and men in your community work together to ensure equal rights and respect for both genders? Maitree, can we come to you?
Sure. I think that this is a difficult answer, difficult question, because if I knew, we would be doing it already. But I do feel that ensuring equal rights and opportunities for all genders is really about challenging power relations and patriarchal norms, which are limiting people's freedoms, while also affirming those cultural values which do uphold dignity and human rights. I think that culture and tradition are not necessarily and do not have to be barriers in themselves, but they often are used to justify discrimination and silence voices, especially of women, girls, and gender diverse people. So, working together in this context would mean building really inclusive community dialogues where people of all genders, young people, faith actors, traditional authorities, everyone can come together and reflect on how cultural or religious practices can evolve to support gender equality and justice. And I think that what we do is always advocate for collective peer-to-peer learning, listening to lived experiences of especially women, girls, and gender diverse people, and holding each other accountable to human rights principles. The challenge that comes here is that this work is deeply political and it is collective. For instance, just the other day, our colleague who works with trade unions was talking about how in her country's context, they often need to approach their work where they need to first approach men of the community, because if they approach women directly, it can lead to it can cause it can compromise on their safety because the situation is so patriarchal. So in that context, it also requires understanding, making sure that we are not compromising on the safety of the very communities that we are working with, and centering the voices of their communities because their lived realities and their knowledge holds the expertise to really start this dialogue.
Thank you, Maitree. Thank you very much. And I think because of time constraints, we come to the close of today's session. Thanks to all the speakers for their very informative and powerful representations and discussions and sharing of their insights. And thanks to our audience and participants for keep making this session so active and live. And we have to, despite whatever is happening in today's war-torn world, and countries like USA having their regressive policies, I'm sure the collective feminist power is going to move ahead, overcome these difficulties, and I would end by saying we shall overcome someday, which will come sooner than we expect. Namaste, till we meet again.